Alright, for today's critical thought, we're going to talk about tutorials once again, but this time we're going to do things from the very basic standpoint as to why your game, and that's you as any developers watching this right now, need to have some form of a tutorial for your game. Now this is going to be based on a post over on Game Wisdom, which you'll find a link to in the description below. But one of the things that I keep seeing that's frustrating me from the independent space is that a lot of games are being released without any tutorials whatsoever. And there are some reasons for this, or some valid reasons. The first that we hear from a lot of developers, obviously, is that if your game is based on a pre-existing genre or design, you can generally assume that most people who are going to play it know it. This is why we've talked about in the past that skill-based games such as platformers, first-person shooters, ARPGs, and so on don't really go into detail when it comes to tutorial design. If you've played one platformer, chances are you'll know how to do other ones. We build up a knowledge base, or the schema that goes into understanding these mechanics and systems that we can then reference into newer games. For instance, when it comes to the platformer genre, at this point, it's become almost like a secondhand memory or secondhand muscle memory when I play any kind of platformer like The End is Nigh, Super Meat Boy, Mario, and the like. In fact, I always get a little chuckle when I'm playing a platformer and I see this same obstacle repeated, and that's the ever popular platform moves left and right, and you have to jump when it's not there to correctly time it. And there are a lot more. As we've talked about over the last decade, a major wave of standardization hit the game industry, especially in the AAA department. And what that meant was it was no longer about creating wildly crazy UIs and control schemes. Instead, everyone settled on kind of the quote-unquote best examples for their respective genres. This is why if you've played Call of Duty, Destiny, Battlefield, Battlefront, or any of those first-person shooters, you typically have a good idea what that control scheme is going to be before you even load the game up. Now, another point about a lot of people who are against tutorials is the fact that they feel a lot of tutorials suck. And that is very hard to argue. In the post, I mentioned, of course, everybody's favorite term, hey, listen, and repeating that for 5,500 times or more throughout The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. And as we've said before, there is certainly an art into creating an effective tutorial, and there's a very wide line between one that is too involved and that it just becomes a slog, or one that is too bare bones and you have no idea what's going on. And many game developers really do struggle with coming up with a tutorial. This is why we've always said that it's always good to save the tutorial for the last thing that you design, because it's something that's going to be constantly changed and iterated on, based on what you're doing to your game. And too often we see developers basically go with the first pass of the tutorial and we're left with something that doesn't work. And again, we could easily segue into a number of topics relating to tutorial design, philosophy, and implementation, but that is way beyond the scope for this video. And again, we'll be coming back to it, I am very sure, in the future. But to get back on topic, why you need a tutorial. The first point is very simple. Every video game is somebody's first, and unless you are explicitly targeting a very niche market, you have to assume that there's going to be someone who playing your game who has never played any game like this before, even if it is a popular genre like a platformer, first-person shooter, and the like. And it's always good to have that kind of information available in-game so that someone can get the basis for what's going on. And again, tutorials can be however long or short as you deem. And like I said, that's another topic in of itself. Another reason why tutorials are very important is that it can also serve as a refresher course for coming back to a game. please raise your hand along with me if you've ever decided to come back to a game after 6 months to a year and you've completely forgotten what the controls are, how the UI works, and all that other very hidden and obscure stuff. And sometimes it's great to replay a tutorial or replay the opening section of the game just to get a refresher course. Now, with that said though, one popular option or one popular quality of life feature is to allow the player to skip a tutorial if they're restarting a game. And this can be, of course, very useful, especially if your game is built on restarting, such as ARPGs, where you'll have different character classes, or an RPG where the intro can be 10 to 15 minutes of just pure exposition. But it's always great, or let me rephrase that, one thing you should not do when it comes to tutorials is one and done. As in, I play for one time, and then that tutorial is locked or unavailable for the rest of this game. And I'll give you an example of that. In the free-to-play game Let It Die, you cannot go through the tutorial or the starting sections, or essentially start a new game, once you start playing the game. Because of the fact that it uses real money microtransactions, they can't have you essentially restart from scratch, because then they will have to refund your money or give you that currency again. So what they do is basically turn off all options to restart that game. And I also saw something similar with the game Road Not Taken, which we did a Saturday Night Grab Bag on. And like I said, this is not a good structure to have. You should always allow the player to replay a tutorial or just simply restart a game if they would like. I've done that more than my fair share of times playing the Etrian Odyssey series. Now, the third reason, probably the most important, why you need to have a tutorial for your game is the unique factors or the special marketing or selling points that make your game different from everybody else. As we've talked about, one of the biggest points towards the independent space or indie games is the fact that developers are free to make whatever the heck they want. And over the last 10 years, or actually probably maybe 8 or 9 years since the indie market really blew up, we have seen a staggering amount of unique games that we would never see anywhere else. Unfortunately, there's a big problem with uniqueness. It's very hard to have a reference point when you're dealing with something that no one else has seen before. And this is one of the biggest reasons why I have these complaints about the independent game space, is that we have developers pushing the envelope and doing things completely brand new and original, but there's no guidance or tutorial for anyone to try and learn these games. And this is a point that a lot of people can be a little bit divisive on. The reason is, when it comes to some of these unique games, a lot of what goes into playing them is about learning as you're going along. It's not about the developer spelling out, you must do this, 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 and you beat the game. But the very important part is that the player still needs a basic or foundational understanding of what your game is about. And I have seen this, or I should say I have experienced this more times than I can count, where I will load up a game and there is no tutorial. So the only thing I can do is just literally be pressing buttons on the screen, trying to figure out what it is I'm doing. And while that is a form of learning, you have to understand that without having a basic foundation, this is not educating the player as to what's going on. If they cannot connect action to reaction, then the learning is not only going to be delayed, but in some cases it can be impossible to learn something without being able to see how these things work. Again, this is why action-based games are a lot easier to learn. I push a button, my guy swings a sword. I put one to one together. If the enemy does a dodge, I understand, oh, if he does that, I should do this. But when I'm playing a grand strategy game, or a simulation game, or a undefinable game, as we've seen in the indie space, when there is no schema or foundation to look at, how are you supposed to learn or start to make those connections as to what I'm doing on the keyboard or the gamepad to what's happening on screen? I've used these examples many times before of games like Crusader Kings 2, The Last Federation, where I just played a few days ago, what was it? I think it was Star Traders Frontiers, let me see. Yeah, Star Traders Frontiers, which that is another great example of why you need a tutorial. This game looks like it's going to be a very interesting and all-encompassing example of that genre. But without a tutorial, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I could spend time learning it, or I could watch Let's Plays and YouTubers talk about it. But that takes me to the final point about why you need a tutorial. It is horrifically bad form as a designer to require the player to go outside your game to learn it. Now, thankfully, we have seen less examples of this in recent years. One of my all-time favorites was trying to learn a war game, and this was, I want to say like 2000, 2001, and there was no in-game tutorial. Instead, I had to load up a scenario, which is then explained in the manual. So I had to basically alt-tab between reading the manual about what I'm supposed to do, go back into the game, perform that, alt-tab back out, and repeat this for, oh my goodness, I think it was like 30 minutes, 30 to 40 minute campaign or a scenario. And that is not how you want someone to learn your game. You want all the learning to take place within the game itself, because that's what someone's going to be doing when they're playing your game. If they can't figure it out through playing your game, they're not going to stick around. And we've seen cases of developers just literally copying and pasting YouTube videos into the game to have you watch. And watching something is not the same as doing it yourself. But again, if we start talking about tutorial philosophy, we will be here for probably another 15-20 minutes. But the point is, you as the game developer should be the utmost master or grand educator as to how your game works. More importantly, if you're the person who designed the game, you should be able to explain to someone how to play it. And if you can't, then that raises more trouble than not. And again, as we said at the start, this is why a lot of developers will wait until the very end to design their tutorial. Or if this is a game in early access, they will push things, they'll have like a starter tutorial, and then when the game is over, when it's near the end, they will push it back as well. 1 second, I need to take a quick sip. I'll be back in a jiff. And we are back. I hope you like that little transition effect that I put in. But one of the most important reasons why you wait until the very end when it comes to designing your tutorial is that it gives you the chance to get your gameplay tested. And again, I don't want to go too much into this because it will be considered off tangent, but when it comes to building your tutorial, you should be getting as many eyes and ears on it as you can, because new people are going to be the best case to look at where those hard to understand spots are with your game's design, the mechanics, or with the UI itself. But like I said, there's so much I could just segue into. To wrap up today's critical thought, again, tutorials are a necessary part of your game, and anyone who says otherwise, do not listen to. Tutorials are not an example of get good from the hardcore crowd. And even challenging games like Cuphead, Demon's Souls, Bloodborne, the like, have tutorial sections. And like I said at the start, there are many, and I mean many, different forms and philosophies when it comes to designing a tutorial. But again, it all starts with having an actual tutorial. And whether you are working on a AAA game or a simple indie title, it is important to be able to educate someone new on how to play your game. Because at the end of the day, you want your game to get as far-reaching as possible, or you want as many people to play it. And one of the surefire ways to push someone away is to just throw them into the deep end without having any guidance and expecting them to sink or swim. With so many games being released on a day-to-day basis, we don't have the luxury of spending weeks or, back in the old days, months trying to learn a new game. Like I said in the past, if I get annoyed with your game within the first 30 minutes of playing it, that's it. There's no second try, there's no do-over. If your game annoys me or I'm having trouble understanding it, I have a good several dozen other games in my backlog, or I should say probably several hundred at this point, to go and play. And it really sucks when we see indie developers struggle to gain an audience or put something out that's very unique and original when no one can understand how to play it, so no one plays it. And again, there's a lot more we could unpack there. But with that said, thank you so much for watching today's Critical Thought. If you'd like to suggest another topic, please let me know in the comments below. But check back for daily discussions on design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back around 10 Eastern for regular streaming. If you'd like to suggest games for me to cover or topics to talk about, let me know in the comments below. For a collection of my writings as well as weekly podcasts on design, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the Game Wisdom Patreon, you can find us on there on patreon.com/gwbycer. $1 will get you into our private Discord channel where we talk game topics and more. $5 will get you voting privileges for any major event, including the Saturday Night Grab Bag, Patreon-funded goals, and more. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you enjoy more videos here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel.